This is Transparency, a podcast by Gender Dysphoria Alliance, hosted by Aaron Kimberly and Aaron Terrell. Each week we'll be joined by people who have personal or professional experience with gender dysphoria and physical transition. We'll also discuss how our trans experiences relate to the concept of gender identity. Join us for a compassionate yet heterodox approach to the question of trans. All right, so we are mixing things up quite a bit today. We are joined by Carole Hooven, who is an evolutionary biologist with Harvard University, and she has also recently wrote the book The Story of Testosterone, the hormone that dominates and divides us. So we thought it'd be really interesting because Carole has a special interest in female-to-male transitioners such as ourselves and the effects that testosterone has on a natal female's brain, body, etc. So we're basically mixing things up in such a way that Carole will be hosting today and asking us questions and being interviewee rather than, or interviewer rather than interviewee. And we also brought Mars Fernandez back. He was on a few episodes ago. He's also a fellow leader with Gender Dysphoria Alliance. We brought him back on because he's got he transitioned more recently than Aaron Kimberly and myself, who was a decade and more ago for each of us, whereas Mars was just 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, we're just going to hand things over to Carole. You can feel free to introduce yourself further than my quick shoddy job there. And yeah, then I'll let you ask us whatever.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And yeah, we've been talking a little bit already, and I'm already getting a little emotional about a lot of different things. And I don't think I know how to host. I'm definitely going to ask you some questions, but I'm not really prepared in the host department.
We don't properly do it either.
So by way of introduction, yeah, I have been at Harvard for about 20 years. I'm just going to say I'm not like a lot of the other long-term instructors here. I didn't graduate really. I didn't have a diploma from my high school. I didn't go to class. I smoked a lot of pot. I just did not have it together. So I wasn't this person who's always been perfect. And now I'm at Harvard. It's the whole very different story that I won't go into. But I think it's important that people know sometimes that people who you might, I wrote a book. It's doing well. I'm really proud of it. It was something I'm absolutely fascinated by, which is testosterone and how it shapes all of our lives in really important ways. And I think you guys have an incredible insight that no one else can have into the power of testosterone, because the three of you, you transitioned at different ages, but you lived the most of your life so far as females, as women with high estrogen and low testosterone. And you're very, very different physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially now because of testosterone. And I don't mean just because of how it acts in your brain, which it does, but because of how it changed your bodies and what that says to the world and how that changes how you feel on the inside, right? So part of why you take it, right, is because you want your body to match how you feel. So I have a ton of questions, and I wish I had written them down in a more organized order, but I guess, and since there's three of you, I'm not sure that, each person should answer each question, or else we'll be here for like a week. But what I do want to know is just your story. And I know some of your listeners, maybe most of your listeners already know, so maybe you just want to give a sort of brief background, but that will help me. I know a little bit about Aaron's experience with gender dysphoria, and because you talked about that on a recent podcast and sort of how that felt to you. And I should just say, for starting, one of the things I'm really interested in is the role of culture and how you think your gender dysphoria might have been different if there were a place for, I don't know if I'm assuming you guys were lesbians, and do you use the term butch lesbian, or what term, if that is correct that you were, I think, lesbians, what term would you use to describe sort of your role, just starting out, so we can get the language straight?
So I use the word butch.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was the only one of us who was not a lesbian prior to
Okay.
transitioning. I was exclusively attracted to men prior to transitioning, and then post transition, I became attracted to women pretty quickly after starting testosterone. But that's the kind of a bit unusual case.
It's no. Kalisti, who I interviewed in my book, had the same thing happen, and so did Elle, the detransitioner. So two out of the three trans people I interviewed had that, and I read about it in the literature. It is not super common, but it does happen, and it's so interesting. So Aaron, I had a student of mine who was female, and she was attracted to men, and she transitioned while she was my student, and I got to see, not finish, because I don't know when the finish is, but start, I got to see 3 years worth of transition, and she would come and tell me, he, in the end would come and tell me about all the changes. And that's also, as you know, less common. So I'm interested. So this is great. So we have different experiences. So you were heterosexual. Do you like to say heterosexual, androphilic, gynophilic? What kind of terms?
No, it's great, great term. I think androphilic and gynophilic is a really accurate way to put it, because it's unchanging with the person. Actually, again, in my I guess I would say androphilic. It was more for me, attraction to men. It was the same feeling as envy, and attraction to women didn't exist because I just saw women as a gross extension of my own body, right? Like it's hard. It's not. It's not as easy to put into like heterosexual. I guess I was heterosexual in that I was a female, predominantly exclusively attracted to males. Then I transitioned. The relief from dysphoria, I think, is what kind of triggered what would probably an existing gynophilic attraction, is what I've kind of surmised. I could be.
Okay, sorry, you got to slow down. Hold on. Sorry. So because I'm still working with the concept of androphilic.
Okay.
Females who want to transition. Do you know what percentage of, and I don't want to, not counting the last like 5 years, but what percentage of people maybe in your age group or something who transitioned, say, more than 5 years ago, peers of yours, say, who would have had a androphilic orientation, who are female, who then had dysphoria and went through a transition?
I don't know what that percentage is. I know it's going to be quite low, or relatively low.
Yeah. Like less than 10%.
No, probably not less than.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe ballpark around that part. I honestly can't answer that accurately. Aaron's, you're a little bit more familiar with the literature in that regard. I don't know if you have a better answer to that percentage as far as.
Yeah, I don't know how the numbers break down, and I'm probably just in terms of, anecdotally, from what I saw in the community 15, 20 years ago, it seemed like it was a lot of the butch lesbians that were transitioning. And I mean, when trans men date trans men, I don't know what we call that. Like, or they would call themselves gay men, but that's confusing to me how we can. But
no, but so Aaron T, can you? I can get intuitively, and from people I've talked to, I can get the butch lesbian thing. That makes sense to me. It's gender to me, and this is something we can talk about. It's gender nonconformity. There isn't a place. Perhaps it's uncomfortable. And I think the process of gender development there if you're going to grow up to be a butch lesbian, I think that must be very uncomfortable and confusing in terms of what sex am I here, or what am I comfortable with, or who am I comfortable with? So I can really easily see that, not easily, but I can get that. And I think a lot of people just understand that kind of intuitively. But Aaron T, I think it's harder to understand what you're talking about or what you went through. So I think that would be interesting for me anyway, to learn more about your experience.
Sure. Yeah. So I did have gender dysphoria for as long as I can remember, a very, very constant, just obsessive feeling that I was supposed to be a boy. And then I kind of anticipated growing out of it. I was very ashamed of it. And I anticipated growing out of it. I never did.
Were you a tomboy, would you
Extremely
say?
so. Yeah.
Were you
Yeah.
really into sports and
Not
that kind of thing?
sports. It
Or-
wasn't, I mean, I played sports with my brother and friends and stuff like that. But I wasn't really sporty or competitive in that way. I was very all about like the woods and just kind of being like, building things, building forts, tree houses, just kind of, I mean, I played with the boys. It was always like, cops, robbers, cowboys, Indians, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I kind of avoided playing with my sister and any other females in the vicinity.
Were
wanted to
they
play-
playing with dolls and things like that?
Yeah.
I can
yeah.
I can kind of relate. This was back in the like early 70s. I was playing Little League. I was climbing trees. I wrote in the book that I dismembered my friends' Barbie dolls and stuff, which I did. I like loved pulling their heads off, and I thought they were silly, and I hated dolls and dresses, and I had 3 older brothers, but I still had some sense of femininity. Did you feel any sense of femininity, or did you just feel like, I don't identify with girls, they like silly dumb stuff, I want to play with the boys, they're rough and tough? So did you just feel, wait a minute, the ones I want to play with are boys and the ones I feel more like are boys, even though you didn't feel any attraction at any point to women? You felt I'm more boy-like.
Yeah, I related with better and identified better with the boys. I wanted to be around the boys. I wasn't, obviously not like in an attraction way at that point at all. And kind of sexual attraction didn't come in until much later in my late teens. But I mean, there were certainly things that I did enjoy. I mean, there were, female friends that I had who I enjoyed like doing crafting projects with and things like that for a little while. But but I didn't, I certainly gravitated much more toward the boys, but there weren't like, it wasn't like, oh, I hate all things girly. It wasn't exactly like that. No, it wasn't like an aversion.
The thing that seems hard for me to reconcile is if you're attracted to males and you want to be sexual with males, one of the worst things you could do is grow a beard. So I would think, unless they're gay. So can you, if you are attracted, that's maybe you were attracted to gay males, so you wanted to grow a beard.
So interesting. Yes. So
help me with that whole sex part.
So I was primarily attracted, yes, to gay men when I in my 20s.
Female.
As a female, yes. Yes, I was much more interested in gay men than straight men. But at the same time, also remember, I had a lot of sex dysphoria about my body. I didn't want sexual attention from straight men. Right. I didn't
because that would affirm that would expose, or whatever you want to call it, your womanhood,
right?
Your
because
femaleness,
yes,
and that you didn't want that. So if you were
right.
sexual with a heterosexual man and he expects you to be feminine sexually, and that was very uncomfortable for you.
Correct. Exactly.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So so I was very, very uncomfortable in that context. But when I ultimately decided to transition, yes, I didn't think that. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'll get gay men to sleep with me. Certainly not. It was more like it was more the sex dysphoria in my own body. It was much more paramount than attracting a partner, either male, female, straight, or gay. It was much more. So I wasn't thinking, oh, I'll alter my body in a way to be sexually appealing or sexually repulsive. That didn't really come into the equation.
So that's interesting. Okay, and obviously, I know you said anything's on the table, but this is I think a sensitive question. Did you have other psychological issues or comorbidities, as they are in the literature? Did you have other stuff going on that you think contributed to any of this, or this is just something organic that you had like a perfectly fine life, but this thing you felt masculine?
Yeah. So I thought that as well. So no, there's no abuse or any sort of trauma or anything like that happened to me. But there's a lot of when I realized like kind of how I felt about my body and what that kind of seems like. It's like trauma seems to be like the most logical explanation, but I never had any.
Yeah.
I think, and I can only kind of surmise this. I don't know for certain, but there was so much shame that I had around feeling like a boy and behaving like a boy. I feel like so much, like there's a lot of like internalized, it's hard to explain, but I think it was sex dysphoria was a result of that shame.
But so can you now talk about the role of your culture or your social environment where you grew up in terms of religion, in terms of values? Did you not see other little girls who were like super tough and tomboyish, or was there nothing sort of in your, where did that shame come from, do you think?
So interestingly, well, I grew up pretty sheltered. So in this current conservative Christian environment, I was homeschooled.
Okay.
All the women in my family were, well, except interestingly, as I said, is my mom, who's quite innately masculine, but also very obsessed with this conservative notion of men do this, women do this. And it's very, homemaker, wife, mother is what you're going to be. And I've rejected that entirely. But no, I didn't really have any example other than my dad, who I felt much more connected to and related to more than my mom, my older brother, and then my sister's 3 years younger than me. So I think a lot of my kind of male identification had to do with having an older brother. I think you kind of understand that a little bit, from what you were talking about when you were younger, is having 3 older brothers, and that kind of shape what your influence or your kind of hobbies, interests, I don't know. But I feel like perhaps I was doing some sort of mirroring with my older brother, who was for the most part my only playmate in my early development. Then as I got older, and like my primary curriculum was about the Bible and home ec, and it was just very much, it felt very restrictive, whereas I could be outside running around and, playing gunfights with my brother and friends, sounded a lot more appealing.
Did your parents or anyone else in your community kind of try to feminize you and just sort of, did they sort of say, no, you shouldn't be playing that game, or you need to be playing with dolls, or like you're saying, there was more of an emphasis on domestic concerns, etc. But so did you then, do you think that you internalized that the way I feel is wrong?
Yes. Yeah. So, cause it was my mom who was basically saying, you're a girl, God made you a girl, girls behave this way, do that, do this. It was I don't remember any of my behavior that led to those conversations. I just remember frequently having those conversations about what girls do, what girls wear. She was constantly trying to get me to wear dresses. I wouldn't do it, but somehow she framed it around, this is what God wants you to do. And so it was there was no distinction between, religion and gender.
And you believed in God.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Like you really felt that deeply. And did you feel you're betraying God, or you're not living up to God's standards or expectations or whatever? And you had no other perspective.
No.
You were homeschooled.
Right. Yeah. I was homeschooled. Yeah. There were other kids in like Sunday school that we went to and whatnot. But yeah, again, I kind of just gravitated towards the boys in any environment where there were other kids. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, thank you. It sounds like you were just a really masculine girl who was going to be attracted to men, and you had a lot of internalized shame about what you felt on the inside and what your body was. Because according to your body, you were God and your family and everyone said you're supposed to be something else, and you're not being that. What the hell is wrong with you? Yeah. Yeah. And now you've resolved that.
Yeah. Yeah. In a very roundabout way. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that was I don't know, maybe you feel like it was that way and that made you who you are and you're okay with it. But I don't think that should happen to.
I became quite, I don't know. I made this comparison recently, became quite introverted and just started living. I think this is what leads, because I didn't outgrow it, right? I didn't outgrow this kind of isolating and kind of fantasizing about life as actually a male. And so I kept thinking I would outgrow it. But then the more you indulge that fantasy, the less likely. I think that's part of what led into it, as well as like this kind of isolating, living the life of I made the comparison to the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, where it's like just this constant fantasy is much better, much more enjoyable than
Reality.
what your body communicates to reality. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And what about Aaron or Mars? Do you want to
jump in?
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on here, by the way, Aaron's. When God, I don't know where to start. Well, for one, I could definitely relate to when you were talking about your mother kind of having being very innately masculine, and I could relate to that. Like I grew up in they weren't really strict, but I grew up in a Cuban household, and I think that, or at least in my view, Hispanics are very much more hung up on these gender stereotypes. So growing up, everything was great. I was able to be the tomboy that I was, run around shirtless. My mother was very much a tomboy, but when she would go out, she would sometimes wear a dress and stuff. So I think her perspective, much like Aaron was talking about, was, at home, everything was fine. But when you go out, there's a certain way that you should behave based upon the fact that you're male or female. This wasn't something that they enforced in those words, but I started to kind of, I think, get that idea, when I was, for example, thrown into modeling classes, right? This was a very traumatic thing for me. And I remember trying to run away from home because of it. And I think the idea was because I was very shy, that was one. But though they never actually verbalized this, I think the other part of it was, well, there has to be a way to, I guess, get me to conform. I think, I don't think that they would ever admit this, and I don't really want to have that conversation with them, but I believe that could be behind it. But growing up, I was generally a happy kid until I was forced into these, expectations based on my gender. But I was a tomboy. I was shy, but I liked playing with the boys. I would play with the girls too, but not right away. And if I did, it wasn't the same experience. So just like the Aarons here, I find myself unpacking a lot of this now. I know that I haven't been transitioning for a long time, but I think deeply about the root cause of my dysphoria and how I came about to be the way I am. And honestly, the only thing I can think of is that I feel as though growing up, I almost romanticized the idea of being a man and everything that comes with it. And how could I achieve that? Well, there's this way out. And if I could just transition, even if it's a trans man and not a literal male, then yeah, why not? That makes sense. Not only will it take
And were
care of
you
my
attracted to males or females?
females. Mhm.
And when did you know that?
When I started thinking about it around probably 13, but it wasn't until late teens that I really started to think I have to at least be bisexual, because I really seemed to be drawn to women and I felt weird around women. So, but I didn't really pay attention to sexual orientation very much. I was the kind of kid that really spent a lot of time in their head, like fantasizing and just writing stories. And so I didn't really think about that too much until later on in life.
Until when later on in life did you start? Do you mean you didn't have strong sexual feelings, or?
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Until when do you feel like that you started to have those feelings?
Probably around, like, I would say 18 or 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that more when you started feeling like I want to be a man?
Not necessarily. No, I think I've
Okay.
always, and I don't know that I ever put it in those words as a child, but I definitely always wanted out of being a female because of the female body, and this is where I honestly don't know why that is. I've never had anything traumatic happen in my childhood or anything.
But did you also not have role models for how you could be in your body and just express your masculine nature?
No, I don't think that's it, honestly.
You did or did not have those?
No, I don't know. I've never been the type to really think about role models a whole lot. I think
Or
that
just examples, of
examples.
what's possible.
Yeah, no, I don't know. A lot of back then, I can think of a lot of characters that were female and maybe rough around the edges, like,
Yeah.
or kind of like a badass character. I don't know that they necessarily qualify as like a butch female, but like,
Yeah.
for example, this, I don't know how good of an example this is, but the legend of Billie Jean, like she was a badass who fought back because a guy hit on her or tried to sexually
Right.
abuse her.
Right.
I didn't really, yeah, I don't know. I'd never feel personally me. I understand how that could maybe cause somebody to feel like there's nobody out there like them. But for me, it wasn't that I didn't think I could be a butch lesbian. It was that I wanted to be, and because I felt, I don't know how to put it into words. I think that masculinity and femininity is a big part of transgender or transsexual. That's kind of what I've summed up. It's a big portion of it. And I think that my masculinity, being masculine as a female, for me personally, it goes so far that apparently I will do whatever it takes to be this sort of hyper masculine version of myself. And how can I do that? Well, I could probably do that by transitioning. And that's what I've thus far come up with for me, is that I don't have any trauma in my background, but that I feel so masculine throughout my whole life. And here's this way that I can be masculine, and it's so much better. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So you feel there's more freedom for you now?
Yes, not necessarily. I mean, I guess freedom as far as I could take my shirt off, but otherwise, I never really felt. This is where I disagree with some people that follow me, because I've never really felt as though a woman can't do something because she's a woman. I understand that males and females are different, and obviously there are advantages and disadvantages, but I never really saw the world like, oh man, I can't do this because I'm a woman. I did feel like, and I do feel like, obviously there's certain attention from males that I don't get now. But again, this was not something that was traumatic for me ever in my life.
Okay.
I didn't get hung up on that at all.
Yeah. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for being here.
My story has a lot of overlap with both Aaron's and Mars. The way that I would describe my childhood, it was like growing up on the set of Little House on the Prairie, a very small town, farming community, a large Mennonite population, and I remember, like, as a kid visiting Hutterite colonies, and there was zero plot line for somebody like me. Like, where does a masculine lesbian fit into Little House on the Prairie? I don't remember them having an episode on that. So I think that was a big part of how my gender dysphoria developed. It wasn't conscious at the time, but I think when I had no way in my environment to make sense of who I was and what I was experiencing, my mind had to do something with that, because I think my masculinity was just innate to me as a person.
Yeah.
When I was 19, I was diagnosed with an intersex condition. I had at least one ovotestes that was discovered by accident, and so that at that time that really further confused my gender. I mean, in some ways.
How old were you when you found that out?
19.
Have you shared about all of the details about that on your podcast already?
I don't know if I have shared. I've mentioned it, but I don't know how much detail I've given in the past. Because I mean, I had the classic gender dysphoria presentation of just really feeling like a mistake had been made, and then I really was a boy in some way.
Sorry, you said you were 15?
I was 19 when the intersex condition was diagnosed.
Okay, sorry.
But gender dysphoria for as long as I can remember.
Can I ask more questions about the intersex condition?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any genetic anomalies that you know of, or differences?
I didn't have genetic testing done. The surgeon, I think, that diagnosed, because it was diagnosed by accident. So I was having a lot of gynecological problems, and it developed a very large grapefruit-sized cyst on one of my ovaries that was causing me a lot of pain. And so the surgery was just to remove that cyst. And when they did the surgery and opened me up, he said that the ovary was unrecognizable as an organ. So it was sent for biopsy. And that's when they discovered that it had some testicular tissue. And the surgeon at the time didn't provide me a lot of information about that. He seemed kind of embarrassed for me and seemed more interested in just reassuring me that, well, we removed it, so it's no longer a problem for you. But
And that's all that you were told? That's all that you were told?
Yeah, it was pretty much all that I was told.
And you never learned more about your genetics or anatomy, or do you know about the rest of your anatomy?
I don't, because I never had genetic testing done. I have read
I mean, your body, like, did you were you getting your period, or?
I was getting very irregular and very painful periods. And I was masculinized as a female, because I did have some facial hair, like even before I started taking testosterone, because I was transitioning, I did have more body hair and facial hair than the average
and they
female.
I'm guessing they didn't do any hormonal tests.
They did do some hormonal tests, and I did have higher than average female testosterone.
Okay.
So which, probably accounts for both being same-sex attracted and being masculinized as a female. Yeah. So it makes sense to me in hindsight, but it was all very confusing at the time, because I learned this, and then it's like, oh, well, I guess that in some ways it validated my perception of myself as male, but in other ways confused me. And I think the surgeon's reaction, the way that he seemed embarrassed for me, it really planted that idea that this is something to be ashamed of. And so it was in one hand validating, but also confused me even more. Like, what do I do with this information? Right. I did start.
In what year?
So that would have been.
What year was this?
1992 or 3, roughly.
And this was in some small hospital.
By then I was living in a medium-sized city. So when I was 18 and graduated from high school, I immediately moved to the city to go to college, and was having these attacks of pain. And that's when that was discovered. So I was out of my community at that point.
What is really notable, I think, is how many stories I hear where one person's response during a critical juncture like this, or critical, delivery of really difficult information, one person's expression or words that they use, like for even girls who get their period, the way that that's characterized, it have such lifelong consequences. And like one, I think really positive change, of course, over time, and that is spreading, which is, much more sensitivity around just having differences. And I personally like the language of difference over disorder when it's not something that absolutely has to be corrected or is causing real medical problems. The destigmatization of these really complex differences and conditions.
Yeah, and my mom.
It
turns out that it does run in my family, which I didn't know, because it was only about a year ago that my parents have been supportive of my transition, and I think there's homophobia in their support, unfortunately. I mean, my dad had said, like, well, that's better than the gay thing. He didn't explicitly say I'd rather have a straight son than a gay daughter, but that was the implication. So that part is bittersweet, but it was only a year ago that my mom said something to the effect of, do you think being trans has anything to do with being a hermaphrodite? And that's the word she used. And I said, well, I do have an intersex condition. And so I think for her, I don't know if it was just that she was ashamed to mention it, or if she didn't understand when I was saying intersex and she was using the word hermaphrodite. I don't know if she realized we were talking about the same thing, because the language has changed over the years. But she said that it runs in her side of the family, which I didn't know until a year ago. So there's just all this like miscommunication and veils of secrecy and shame around all of this stuff. And it's only now that I'm now sort of unpacking all of it, and what a wild journey it's been. But all these pieces that just a series of unfortunate events, kind of added up to my transition.
And so much of, I think, what the three of you, from my point of view, because, I just fit into the female woman thing, right? So I don't have to think about it. But I do feel like what you three are talking about, you've all had some painful experiences that to some degree are caused by not having much flexibility in gender roles, right? And there are some societies that have, a third gender for people who, mostly for males who don't fit in. And then that seems to alleviate a lot of the discomfort. And it seems, I think we're getting to a place where there is a lot more flexibility in roles, but culturally, of course, it varies so much, even, within the United States, but of course, across different countries and cultures. And so I'm personally, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm very pro relaxing those norms as much as possible to make it possible for, like, my kid is a boy. He's 12. He's heterosexual, I believe, but he went through a phase where he wore dresses, and, that in Cambridge, I wrote about this in the book too, in Cambridge, like that was, people were literally, "You go, mom," like rewarding me when I walked to school with him. And I was just like, what the fuck? My kid's wearing a dress. Like, I'm not a hero here. I shouldn't be. And he shouldn't be. And the school shouldn't be. It should just be like, he's wearing a dress. It has to be clean. His hair has to look decent. I don't care, what it is, but like, I wish that he could just go through that. It's not a big deal. People aren't like clapping on the street. It's just whatever. That's what he wants to do. Who cares? That's my personal view. I know there are a lot of people who do not agree with that, but to me I just wonder, of course, just given what you've just told me, which is just a tiny slice of what you experienced, if the world were more like that, if you would have transitioned. Because at least for Mars and Aaron T, it seems like you did not have, and maybe also you, Aaron K, in ways, you didn't have references for what you were experiencing. And it was super different. You didn't know what to make of it. You didn't know what your options were. So now we have the internet, of course, but the option is drugs,
trans,
surgery, pharmaceutical industry, medical device, pharmaceutical industry to me, there's somebody's making a lot of money here.
I agree. I think it's easy to attach to the trans narrative when you're confused and just needing a narrative.
There are answers in a community and like identities and groups, and people are so enthusiastic.
Yeah. The problem is I don't think that the narrative is correct, right? That we're all just trans and we were born trans, and there's so much more sort of rich detail, complexity that trans narrative is hiding, and that's our goal, as an organization, and with the podcast, is just to open up those stories so that we can get to the individuals, not just this political movement.
But you're the trans community. You're a monolith, obviously.
Yeah.
So this is all fascinating. Of course, we haven't even talked about hormones yet, but
can I just say something about what you touched up on?
Yeah.
I do agree with relaxing things a bit. Unfortunately, apparently relaxing means going to the extreme of just transitioning kids now. But to me, it is the opposite in a way of relaxing. Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah.
I was just kind of like saying, like, I don't even know. Do we know what relaxing could mean today? Because we're doing the whole trans kid thing, which I think it's completely wrong. But then the other aspect here that I have seen, especially on Twitter with a lot of detransitioned females, is the shame in being a butch female. And then I've also seen this a lot with some not detrans males, but I do hear it in their story that there's this shame in being a very feminine male. You get made fun of, bullied. So I do agree, obviously relaxing these gender norms would help, but to me, like, I feel like it's a bigger issue, the shame that comes with being, not like the other boys or not like the other girls. That's kind of like, how do we fix that?
Yeah. Yeah. And just along those lines, I'd be curious to hear what you think of the pronoun trend. Because I sort of have the feeling that we are now overemphasizing the categories, and you must choose a category and identify with it and broadcast it. And I feel like that only emphasizes that you got to fit in somewhere rather than just open it up and be male. And I mean, I understand it. And I don't mean to criticize that, because I think there's something to it. And I think it is an effort to, in a way, show that gender is flexible or fluid or whatever. But I also feel like it's restrictive in some sense and overemphasizes norms and you're supposed to adhere to some norm. So I don't know.
So much of the trans movement is phrased as kind of packaged to look like it's gender expansive and destroying gender binaries, when in fact, when in actuality, it's making them much more stringent and
Right.
Must be opted into, and yeah. So it's just funneling, funneling people into these boxes that it's essentially saying that it's destroying, is really counterintuitive to the stated. So
would you use your pronouns, or I mean the few trans men who I know don't want to draw any attention to any of that. They just want to live their lives. Like they're not interested in going around a room and having everybody talk about their gender, because that's that is the last thing they want to do. So how do you guys feel about that? Or can you imagine how you might have felt as a young person, like in my classroom? Because I know there's, a lot of people think that is the thing to do, is start on the first day, everybody say their pronouns and their identities. And that makes me uncomfortable, but I don't.
Yeah, I feel uncomfortable too. When we start business meetings and stuff with announcing our pronouns, it feels ritualistic, and sort of virtual signaling, but it doesn't help me as a trans person at all. Just that people are sort of just saying these mantras over and over and over again doesn't make me feel more comfortable or more safe. I just feel sort of embarrassed.
I agree. Also, another thing in regards to that is, you're talking about a classroom full of kids, let's say 8 years old. If they weren't thinking about gender, and now we're announcing ourselves with a pronoun, now they're thinking about gender, and that's the most bizarre thing. Yeah, they have to choose. I don't like it. It's very backwards and embarrassing, and also unnecessary, I think. It also doesn't count for people like us. Generally, the point of transition is to just kind of go on with our lives, not to stand out and say, hey, by the way, my pronouns are he, him. Right.
Well, it used to be that there was a lot of support, and the whole point of transitioning was to just exist in the world as the opposite sex, and we put a lot of work into doing that successfully, so that we didn't have to go around telling people, well, that you must use this pronoun and this name. Like, we just put the work into transitioning successfully, so that the world would just read us as we wanted to be read, and people refer to me as he because that just naturally comes out of their mouth, right? It's not because it's compulsory that they must use a certain pronoun. In the butch lesbian community, it's not uncommon to call the butches by male pronouns, and again, that's not compulsory. It's just sort of built into the culture. It's not uncommon to call them boys or sir or but there was no delusion that that's because we actually were men. It was just a nod to our masculinity and our social role.
So, but you don't think that formalizing that process, say in a college classroom, would be helpful? Because maybe, I mean, it's not, I don't know. I guess it's not that I would refer to a student in the classroom in the third person anyway. So, I mean, that makes it a little funny, because I would just use their name or say you. But I could see, there might be an instance where a pronoun was needed. So it is hard to know. I do think, maybe declaring an email and stuff is one thing. But then there's going around in the classroom. But I guess, there's just different people have different needs and ideas there. But when you do introduce it in the classroom, it's something then that everyone feels they have to participate in, even if they're not comfortable. Because then if they don't, everyone's going to wonder what's
yeah.
going
And the
on.
vast majority of people, I think, how do I put it? Like the visual cues that we see match the
Right.
pronouns that they want to use the vast
Right.
majority of the time, right? So,
Right.
And when in the butch community, when we were called, boys or sir or whatever, I mean, that wasn't based on having a round circle conversation to announce our pronouns.
Right.
It just, there were visual cues, that prompted that, because we were obviously
Right.
more masculine, and so it's
Okay.
yeah, it's the formalization of it and
Yeah.
the ritualization of it that I feel uncomfortable with.
Okay. This is all so helpful. And now I think we should get to the hormone part. And this is great to have all this context. I have a lot of questions. So I'm just gonna, okay. So you all three started with, you went to I assume you went to some gender specialist, or did everybody go through the traditional medical route, or did anybody get their drugs off the internet? Or did you have just standard,
I think
decent medical care?
I think their experience is probably totally different from what I did. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know who wants to go.
I went to a clinic in town that was known to be specialists in
Okay.
trans care.
And Aaron T, same thing, or?
No, I just went to my doctor and I said
Okay.
that I had gender dysphoria, which I had just learned the term online. And I mean, obviously, I always had it, but it's like, okay, this is what I can say. It explains it. I told my doctor I had gender dysphoria. I wanted to transition to be male, and she said, "Yep. Normally, I would require 6 months therapy, but you're an adult. You sound like you know what you're
Okay.
doing. So I'm going to refer you to an endocrinologist who doesn't require a letter for therapy." So I went to see that endocrinologist, and he said, "No, I absolutely do require a letter from a therapist, but let's just have a conversation about it." Within 15 minutes, he had written me a prescription for testosterone.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it was very easy.
And Mars, you had to get the testosterone on your own?
Not necessarily on my own. I did attempt to go to a gender therapist for maybe like 5 months, but after 3 months, he was willing to prescribe me testosterone. I didn't feel like that was the right move because it was fairly quick.
Yeah.
So basically, I stopped seeing the gender therapist, and I kind of just did my own work on my own, kind of trying to figure out what I want to do. And I think a year or something after that, I then decided, okay, I'm going to do this. But I didn't want to have to go through a therapist all over again. So I went through informed consent.
Okay.
And I thought that what would happen was I go into my appointment, they do blood work, and I pick up my testosterone prescription the next day or the next week or whatever. But actually, I went to informed consent, went to my appointment, and within 20 minutes when it was over, she was like, "Well, whenever you're ready, your testosterone is available at the pharmacy down the street or whatever."
Okay.
And, yeah.
Okay. So did you all just started with the normal dose? There was nothing unusual. How did you take it? What form did you take it in?
Intramuscular.
Okay.
Is how but I started at half the normal dose.
Okay.
So,
You worked up slowly over time.
Yeah, about 5 years, because actually when on just half the dose, I was already in mid-male or lower to mid-male range.
Okay.
So I stayed at that for the first 5 years.
Were
5
you
or
in
6
lower
years.
to mid-male range because you already had relatively high testosterone for a woman?
I don't know. I was never
Probably
tested
not.
as such. Yeah, I
Okay.
don't know. I was never. Yeah, but I was on half the dose, and until about 5 years in, and then that was doubled to 0.5 cc's per
Okay.
week. But I mean, I think it's likely that I already had high testosterone. Again, late periods or regular.
But you would have
periods,
known
uncomfortable.
if you were even above the female range, you would have started to get facial hair and acne and et cetera. So you really probably were not significantly higher than the normal female range.
Well, I definitely had like dark lip hair, and I had a happy trail and stuff like that prior to actually injecting
Okay.
testosterone. But I think that's that unusual.
But you can get happy trail anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So you injected once a week.
Mhm.
Okay. And Aaron, how did you take yours?
I also injected once a week.
And Mars,
Sorry, same.
Okay. So I'm just going to fire some questions. So what I write about in the book, I'm going to tell you, I think already read that part of the book, but I'll just say what I learned from my interviews. And so I interviewed a male to female trans person, a female to male trans person, a female to male and back to female detransitioner. And I also interviewed a 12-year-old male who was just starting puberty blockers. And then what I did was I researched the relevant literature on the mostly psychological behavioral effects of these huge testosterone changes. But I also got into some of the physical changes, particularly changes in the voice, changes in hair growth, changes in muscle distribution, obviously, which are profound. So, going from female to male, you can have much more sort of faster and more dramatic, convincing changes than going in the other direction, because it's hard to go, from a fully masculinized frame, in particular with a deep voice. You really can't undo that, nor can you undo the effects of testosterone in puberty on like facial hair, et cetera, completely. Anyway, so, but the main effects, you guys already know, but just to summarize, especially from female to male. So I am a woman, and part of why I wanted to get into this, part of why I'm obsessed with this hormone, is because I want to know what it's like to be a man. And I came out of writing the book with a lot of sympathy, a more sort of empathy, I guess, I don't know if it's empathy, compassion for the particular kinds of struggles that men face, particularly around sex and aggression, obviously, because the literature on the effects of testosterone in transition, and I'm just saying this because I want you to tell me where I'm getting it wrong and where I'm getting it right from your personal experiences, is that first of all, and I just want to also say that in male people, as fetuses, are exposed to very high levels of testosterone in utero. So you guys, none of you had this. Aaron K., you might have had something. We don't know. You might have had unusual, like much higher than Mars or Aaron, who might have had higher for a female, but that would be within the typical female range, just on the high end for Aaron T. and Mars. But Aaron K., we don't know what you experienced in utero. And I'm guessing you could have had significantly higher T exposure as a fetus. But for typical males, there are very high levels of testosterone in utero that the testes are producing that shape the brain. And we know this from research, especially in non-human animals, and the human literature from looking at differences of sexual development, especially, is totally consistent with what we see from experiments in animals, that you can manipulate masculine behavior, especially play. And all of you talked about masculine play as kids. And this is like one of the number one sex differences that occurs before puberty, right? Before you have the huge pubertal differences in testosterone and estrogen. So little boys and girls are different, partly because of culture, of course, but it's interacting with these differences that we're born with that lead males to prefer rough and tumble, boyish play, like physical play with other boys. Like that, we know you can manipulate that in mammals, because little male mammals do the same thing way more than female mammals. And you can just manipulate that by manipulating the fetal testosterone environment. So we know that's what happens. So the point part of this digression is that when you change your testosterone levels in adulthood, yes, you're changing. This is called the activational phase, right? So you have the organizational phase of testosterone, which is in very early life. And then you have the activational phase where in males, when testosterone goes up, it activates those previously masculinized neural structures in ways that are different than it does for females who didn't have that early testosterone exposure and whose brain is not masculinized in that way. So the point is that whatever changes you experienced by going from female to male levels, are probably not the same as what a natal male would experience, right, in puberty, because that testosterone is acting on a already masculinized brain. Okay. Mm-hmm. However, that's just like one big sort of caveat. What I learned and what I sort of had known, from, I've been doing this stuff for a long time, but I found this evidence really extremely compelling that male puberty, first of all, is overwhelming to everyone I have spoken with who is male, says that they're overwhelmed with a desire for sex, that it's urgent. They're getting erections all the time. They struggle with how to relate to the opposite sex. Usually gay men, it's something different. Gay men have the same sexual feelings, but they don't necessarily have the awkwardness of heterosexual men, because the target is something they don't understand. And gay men kind of get it with each other. And so my heart opened a little bit for that struggle. If you're on the receiving end of it as a woman, you're just kind of like, fuck you, you horny bastard, leave me alone. Sorry to put it that way, but I can get, you don't want to be objectified. You don't want, in a sense, yeah, I want to be attractive. I want people to find me sexually attractive. I'm married, whatever. But, of course, before I got married, I'm just going to put my foot in my mouth. But the point is, I get, you don't want to be just a sex object. You want to be taken seriously as a full human being, and that's not always happening. And I have this insight into that now, which makes me feel a little bit more sympathetic, or I don't know if it's empathetic. I'm getting confused. So when you guys went from, and assuming that none of you have had surgery, but I don't know if that's the case, and we don't even have to get into that now. But going from female to male, especially in the early part of that transition, the literature and from the scientific literature on the effects and my interviews suggest that it's akin to a male puberty. And that's what I write about in the book in this very dramatic way, which might have been annoying if it seems like that was overblown. And one big point is there's huge amount of variation. I'm sure you guys all had very different experiences. Not everybody feels like, wow, I'm out of control horny, or that their sexual orientation changes, but that was a common response that I got and that the literature supported. Is that's one of the number one changes, is like, holy shit, this is how the opposite sex lives. So that's, yeah. Okay. So that, I just said a lot, and would love to hear just the sex part. And then we can talk about anger or tears or aggression or whatever after, but the sex thing seems like a big deal.
Yeah, initially, I would say that that's true. Like initially, it really ramped up my sex drive, and then over time, that kind of leveled out again and became manageable. But initially, it was fast and dramatic.
Can you give us any as much as you want to say about that, because I want to get it. Like, I want to really because women, we go through it and sex drive goes up, but it's not. From what I can glean, it is not like it is for men. It's not, or for people who just take male levels of testosterone.
Yeah, I would say before testosterone, my sex drive was more relational. It had, like when I dated, it had more to do with the connection, and it wasn't like an immediate like physical response. It was more relational. But once I started taking testosterone, it was a much more just physical response.
So what does that mean? So what I want to understand is it like the female is a body? It's, yes, she has a personality and all that, but it's just like there's an attraction to the physical person almost more than the whole person. Is that right?
Yeah, because prior to testosterone, it was uncommon for me to just see somebody and immediately, I mean, I would definitely see people and think, well, she's attractive, but I didn't have the same immediate, um, sexual response just from visual cues. That was usually something that developed as I got to know somebody.
Right.
Whereas after testosterone, it was much more just visual cues where I could see somebody and felt a physical attraction. So prior to taking testosterone, I didn't really understand that about male sexuality, that
Right.
how could you just be attracted to random women that you don't even know and immediately want to sleep with them. I couldn't relate to that at all, but I understand that more once I started taking testosterone.
Do you understand the desire to manipulate the target? I'll just say the woman, to manipulate that person to get your needs met?
Yes, I do. I
can understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was always mediated by the fact that I spent 30 years of my life as female and hated that attention from men. So there was always that battle of understanding, well, I don't want to behave in certain ways that I would have found repulsive as a female. And that, so there was always that internal struggle.
Who won?
Over time, I would say the social part of me won. The part.
But when you were in the throes of it, and you were like that, when that need was really strong and you were really driven, did you ever? Because as a woman, it is we don't do that. We don't manipulate. Well, we manipulate men for sure, but not to get sex usually, right? Of course, there's overlap, and it's not like all the women are like this and all men are like that. But on average, I think that a lot of men do that. It just comes naturally, and they didn't have the experience of living as a woman to know how shitty that actually is to be on the receiving end of. So you're saying now, living as a man, you get that desire to do that.
I get it. Yeah, I don't think I've ever let myself go there and behave that way.
Mars has gone there.
I have. I'm not
Can you
lie.
talk about that? Like, can you talk about it? Were you yeah.
No, just kind of like comparing before transition. There are very few times that I think I attempted to manipulate for sex, but not very often, honestly. And even still, the few times that I recall that I did do that in the past, there was already some sort of relationship there, be it a friendship or somebody that I had encountered multiple times.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a random stranger.
Yeah.
And I've always been very much, very paranoid about sleeping around because I find STDs to be disgusting. So I was never the type to do that. But then, honestly, one of the biggest explosions, actually, that sounds horrible. What I'm trying to say is that I walked into that one. What I'm saying is the sexual response that I had for so many things within whatever it was, a month or two after transitioning, was pretty intense. I felt like I was going crazy. At the time, I had a girlfriend, and I found myself wanting to watch porn sometimes, like in a very just more, I don't know, like I apparently needed to just relieve myself way more often within that first month.
So sorry, do you mean masturbate?
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yes,
no, this is
yes,
very common.
masturbate.
This is in the literature. I mean, and plus there's a big sex
Mm.
difference in masturbation.
Yeah.
Of course, men masturbate way more than women. Obviously, they watch much more pornography, and they report having a higher sex drive and also wanting more sexual novelty, more sexual partners. But I didn't get a sense of that from the literature that trans men, yes, the libido went up, but I don't have a sense of the desire for sexual variety. If that changed for you, is it the libido more? Or did the need for variety also go up?
I think it's the libido more, but also
okay, that's interesting.
But yeah, it definitely that went up. And I also think that because the libido went up, well, now I'm single, I don't have a girlfriend, but I think that because your libido goes up, or for some of us anyway, then you start to expand your options. Even though I would have never, messed around with this girl from the bar who I think is kind of ugly, but my libido is saying do it. And now I'm more likely to do it because all you're thinking about is sex, which is, to me, it gave me a huge understanding. And it's not to say this doesn't make it okay for obviously men to cheat and things like that, but I kind of get it now. I understand why their brain goes there. Just like Aaron was talking about, very subtle changes, right? I used to look at women and think, oh, she's gorgeous. And maybe I had fleeting thoughts of, I wouldn't mind meeting her and things escalating, but now it's like sometimes I catch myself looking at a woman's, breasts or ass, and I'm thinking immediately sex, and
Can I ask a question about that?
yeah.
When you see a woman's boobs or butt, so women obviously know this is a thing, right? A lot of people are getting breast surgery and butt implants and everything. So we're aware that this is quite powerful, since women will spend a huge amount of money and time and effort on those parts specifically. But they might not understand exactly what goes on in a man who is like, boing, it's working. The boobs are working on me. What is the nature of the fantasy? Are you like imagining doing something with her butt or her boobs, or playing with them, or like how? I don't know, because we don't really have this equal kind of, like, occasionally women will imagine a guy naked, or he might look great naked, but that's not this like,
I was gonna
you don't
say,
go to the sort of pornography right away based on that particular woman. Are you willing to provide any details about that? Or,
I was thinking suddenly it feels like Aaron T might be best for this one.
I want a little detail. Give it.
No, actually, you know what? I want to say two things, and then I'll let somebody else jump in, so I don't put it all out there too much. But as far as visuals, I did find that changed a lot, because it's not that I'd never seen porn in the past, but the visuals were so intense after taking testosterone. It was.
What do you
crazy.
mean the visuals? Like, tell women, because you were
So, like,
were one. Like, you didn't know what was going on in the male psyche. Women need. I really think, and this is part of why I wanted to write my book, that women want to really get it. It's good for us to get it. We need to be learning about this. We need as much information as possible, and you guys are in like the best position, I think, to provide some of that information, and it's just interesting anyway. So
when I talk about visuals, I mean, I understand how porn is so appealing to men, because masturbating without porn when you're on testosterone, it's just not the same as while you're on testosterone and watching porn. It's almost like
masturbating.
Did I say that
right? Say that sentence again.
So for a man or somebody taking testosterone to masturbate, watching porn it's more sexually satisfying than just masturbating.
Being with a person?
No, I'm not talking about a person. I'm saying,
but that's a thing too. I think young kids are watching so much porn now
absolutely.
that's also making it more
that
difficult
is a problem.
to get aroused in person.
But I just meant as far as not having a visual. So I kind of understand.
Oh, of
this,
course.
Right? Yeah.
You're just saying your fantasy versus porn?
Yes, but that wasn't wasn't that big of a deal for me personally before transitioning, and it changed. Like when I see, and I got to clarify, actually, at this moment, I'm not on testosterone, so we can talk about that a little bit, because things have declined now that I'm not on it. So I'm talking about when I was on testosterone. When I would see a woman have, she has cleavage, or at the gym, some girl has a really great ass and she's working out in front of me. It's kind of impossible to not look. You're telling yourself don't stare, but also you want to look. And
women look too. I mean, I'm not like fantasizing about the woman, but I am. If women really evaluate each other, and I'm also trying to imagine. Like, I'm like, wow, she has a great ass. I wonder what it is that the guy is thinking. Because I'm thinking like, I want my butt to be like hers. It's not what the guy is thinking, but women are comparing themselves to very attractive women. Yeah. So you're kind of studying what the other woman has. But so you're just yeah, I don't know, like what goes on. You're just imagining yourself with the person with that.
I'm personally, and I was never somebody that was into tits that much, to be honest. But then I got on testosterone, and now I'm thinking I appreciate all of these breasts around me, and I do think it's not a matter of you look at them and you think, wow, she has really great ass or breasts. You're thinking, or at least I'm thinking, wow, I wonder what it looks like under the clothes, or I wonder, where could we go in the bedroom? What are my chances with her? Because I can't stop thinking about what I could do to her body, and obviously some women will not like that, but that is quite literally what you think of.
No, whatever. So you're thinking like, not just, but so, because I would think like, oh, I mean, just in terms of reproductively, you should be driven to have sex with her.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And the boobs are the breasts are an indication of her reproductive value. Is it worth your time and energy to have sex with her? Like theoretically, could she get pregnant? So you should be designed to be attracted to signals of high reproductive value.
I see what you're saying.
And
obviously,
boobs and a small waist and a nice round butt with lots of energy on it in the right places means high estrogen, high reproductive value, worth your time and energy. So it makes sense for you to start obsessing about her because that's going to motivate you to go have sex with her and, spread your
So I can
genes.
see how all of those things that you just listed mean a whole lot more to a biological male, obviously. So
or somebody with high testosterone. And that's what's
fair,
interesting about the hormone is it's just the hormone changing your brain. Right? To help you reproduce. I mean, yes, you're not going to be reproducing in that particular way, but that is what the hormone does in animals. And that's what we are. And it's doing it to your brain. But it's amazing that suddenly you're interested in breasts. Like, that's incredible.
Right. No, absolutely. It definitely changes your outlook on sex, I think. Even if you fight it, you just can't.
All right.
What I want to add to this
Thank
is,
you.
I mean, so my brain did go.
This is awesome.
I mean,
this is awesome. I hope everybody sees this. Yeah.
On the same trajectory here with what Mars and Aaron were saying is that, sexuality became incredibly object oriented, body parts. So like, again, when I was attracted to men previously, started taking testosterone, out of the blue, it was breasts that I was attracted to. I was always repulsed by breasts because they reminded me of what was on me that I hated. But I went to this corner store to pick up something some evening. Again, it was like a matter of weeks on testosterone, and there was a Maxim cover with this beautiful woman with these gorgeous breasts in a small bikini, and suddenly I was physically aroused, rather like out of in that, and then that pattern stayed. But
can I just ask a technical question that my student who was transitioning described to me?
Mm-hmm.
And he had not had surgery and just talked about what was happening with his clitoris and talked about constantly getting clitoral erections and that there'd be way more sensation in the clitoris and that it was intense and sharp and
it's actually painful.
And one of the other things I learned. Okay, so from the research, and this is another thing I'd love to hear about, is orgasm, going from more diffuse and longer lasting off testosterone, whereas on testosterone, more sort of acute and spatially focused on the genitals. Not everyone had this, and I heard from some people that it wasn't like that, but that's what was in the literature, and that is also what the people I interviewed described. But anyway, if you're willing to talk, can you talk about like physically what that arousal felt like when in your genitals when you're on testosterone versus off? Because obviously you were aroused as living as a woman when you weren't on testosterone, but I don't recall, yes, I'm going to reveal that I don't recall like having a clitoral, or yes, women who get aroused do get a little bit of a clitoral erection, but from what I understand, that then like really amps up and can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, so at first, because you get a lot of initial growth on testosterone, right?
Yes, so your clitoris actually grows.
Yeah,
that's right.
But then, so yes, arousal is primarily focused there. You physically feel it, and that's where it's focused, I guess.
But you feel like you need release.
Yes.
In that area.
Correct.
like,
Yes.
really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where it's isolated at. And well, so as far as the physical feeling of release, when I've talked to women about their essentially since after testosterone I started having sex with women and having more insight as to how they experienced it, I always had a very different feeling of I've always had a very like a refractory period was absolutely necessary. Like I could never have multiple orgasms, which apparently is very common for most women, most females. And
I wouldn't say most. I mean, a
Oh,
lot of
okay.
women don't have orgasms.
Oh, okay,
So
okay,
no, I don't think
okay.
multiple is common for most. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, and then also the what was I saying? The that intense isolated I always had those kind of intense isolated, not whole body
Okay.
experience or anything
Okay.
like that. So that always stayed the same. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the
But the need for it became much more intense.
The need became much more intense. And I want to kind of pick up on what they were saying as well when you talked about the whole manipulation thing. It's one thing that I can't relate with men is that coercion, like the long game plan. I've never understood that. So like once I started having much more physical, immediate response to physical sexual stimulus, it's more like, okay, either I have an opportunity to go take care of this personally right now, or try to distract myself in some sense. But I never understood how no matter how long I've been on testosterone, no matter how I can kind of relate with men sexually in certain ways, I'll never understand that like that long game mentality where it's like, I want to have sex with this person and let's see how many days or weeks or how much emotional energy to put in to make this thing happen. I've never been able to relate with that or
That's what
understand
I think Mars was very illuminating there, because there's like an obsession that starts, right, about a particular woman or her body parts or whatever, is what it sounds like. And it's hard to stop thinking about a particular woman, and she's kind of a target, is what it sounds like.
You're right.
I don't know.
And I never understood. I never could relate with that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now that so I've been for medical reasons, I've been taking a break from testosterone, not because I actually want to. As bizarre as it might sound to some people, I find it almost extremely dysphoric to masturbate now, because it is once again a different experience, kind of like the old experience, and I just hate it. It's crazy, but because now my orgasms are back to mostly, I guess, body, to whereas when I was on testosterone, it was more focused on that area, and it's just different. And I don't know. Again, I know a lot of being a dysphoric adult is a mind game, but it really trips me out. I do find though that I'm not thinking once again about sex as intensely or as often. But overall, all of it just reminds me of being female, and I don't particularly, it trips me out. I don't know.
So can I just then, because it's already, I don't know how the podcast is, it's already 4:37, but this is great. And I want to make sure that I also ask, so first of all, this is, I mean, I could keep going on the sex stuff. This is so rich and interesting. But the other big thing, so I was crying with you guys before, or tearing up right before we started the podcast. And this is something that I struggle with. I'm embarrassed by it. I can't really control it. And I wrote about this also in the book, partly because it's my own personal struggle. So I specifically asked the people I interviewed about crying and emotionality, and also really dove into the literature on this topic and what happens in female to male and then in male to female when you change your testosterone levels. And it was totally, again, a lot of variation, but the theme is crying really abates significantly. Like the tears do not come anymore, or they come very rarely. And what I did hear anecdotally, so there's an assumption that aggression would go up. However, I did not find that, and I investigated that. And I think part of the reason is most people are not physically aggressive. So to start with, like even most men are not physically aggressive. And so people who are transitioning say from female to male, you might not see any difference in physical aggression. And also female, there is not a huge difference, sex difference in low levels of physical aggression, which is where most people are aggressive, throwing things, pushing, hitting. Women do a lot of that, actually. Men do more of the very serious physical injury. That's a huge sex difference, but it's not a huge sex difference if you're talking about low level physical aggression. And most people don't do very much. So the point is that when you go from female to male levels, there doesn't tend to be any discernible increase in physical aggression, but people did describe, and this is consistent with the literature, a dulling of emotions overall, a reduced ability to access a wide range of emotions, suppression of tears for the most part, except the emotion that is retained, that people can access, is anger. So it's not that anger goes up, it's just that it's not squashed like the rest of them. And so I'm curious to hear how that resonates with you guys, if that's consistent with your experiences. Aaron K, maybe you want to.
Yeah, I've been nodding a lot as you've been talking, because I relate to that very much. That I and that happened pretty quickly when I started testosterone.
Before the physical change, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the really interesting things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's one of the first changes that I would have noticed, is just that my emotions in general seem to level out. I was never a big crier. Excuse me. I was never a big crier even before transition. But
yeah,
Aaron, Terrell, and I talked about this a little bit recently. That I definitely notice a difference with crying. That I feel it welling up, but it's like there's a ceiling to it, and it doesn't make its way into my eyes.
But do you feel like the same vulnerable or pained or whatever emotion is present in you? You're aware of it, but you cannot express it.
Yeah, that's how I would describe it. I'm still able to cry for sentimental things, and this is the part that Aaron and I talked about. That watching a sappy movie or something, when something is cute or sentimental or sweet, I seem to cry more than I ever had before. But when it comes to crying out of sadness or frustration, I don't remember.
Well, the crying that I did before the podcast was not really sadness or frustration. It's like an empathetic cry. It's like someone else is in pain. And that is where there is some evidence that testosterone inhibits empathy. And so I don't know if it's, because male animals do need to compete with each other for status and mates. And if you're going to beat the shit out of someone or kill them, you cannot be super sensitive to your competitor's pain, say, but women might, cap their ability to kill or inflict serious injury for various reasons. And because they have to protect themselves physically, for one thing, because that is better for their reproductive success, and men can benefit reproductively by being more physically aggressive. And it may be that empathy or those vulnerable emotions tend to interfere with that ability, right? So that testosterone might have some effect on that, those emotions. So it's interesting that you might feel them, but don't show them. So it might be adaptive for you to have them, but not to signal it or to let those kind of really overwhelm your decision-making or something. And I'm just sort of thinking out loud now, because it's an interesting.
Because where I might have cried before due to frustration, like if I was frustrated with something, like my wife, if she's frustrated, she starts crying. Whereas if I get frustrated, that's when I get mad. Because I'm not able to release that frustration through crying like I used to be able to.
If you could reflect back when you were living as a woman, did you ever feel frustration? Well, you weren't in a heterosexual relationship, but frustration with men not being able to express themselves, maybe verbally, or talk about their emotions? Or was that ever, for any of you, any kind of an issue when you were living as women? And do you have different insight into that now?
Personally, no, I was never frustrated about that. However, I did often wonder why that was, and now I understand why. So that's all I have on that.
Okay.
I
what about Aaron T?
Yeah, that was never an issue for me. I was always made fun of for being like a robot, and so I was the one who was quite emotionally held in, kind of subdued,
Right.
not very emotionally expressive. Definitely not a crier. Like Aaron K was just saying, now I'll watch a sappy movie or sad
Right.
movie, start crying. Never would have been the case before. So that is kind of the opposite of what you normally hear. I was never a crier before.
Well, yeah, because you guys were more masculinized, I think, as kids too, or as younger
Potentially.
people.
Yeah.
So maybe that has something to do with why you didn't have that kind of need or feel that frustration.
I did have a tendency to make fun of actual males for being emotionally expressive, and now I feel bad about that in retrospect. Just with a more, more sensitivity as I get older. But I remember basically being like, "Well, I'm fine with this. Why aren't you?" Like it's kind of like man up sort of stuff that I feel ashamed about now, because if being kind of stoic kind of came naturally to me. But no, so I don't really have anything. The sex stuff is where I now can empathize with men in a way that I was frustrated before. Is like being very sexually sexually objectifying others, or being really motivated sexually, or just that on one hand I can better understand why males behaved in certain ways that I didn't understand before, and on one hand, I'm kind of frustrated that I was being misled in certain ways. I didn't realize I was being misled. But then also it's like, okay, wait, I can also have empathy for just the intensity of that drive, I guess. But with emotions, I was never really
right.
Yeah.
I want to say something. I guess more of a question to you, Carole, is how much of this do you think is men adapting to, obviously there's this competitive nature to being a man. I guess my question that I wanted to raise on this topic is how much of not being able to cry or having a tough time crying is a part of just adapting to this, I guess, sort of male culture where you don't want to appear like the weak man, right?
The thing that's interesting, so there are these big cross-cultural differences in crying and emotionality, and like the UK. So my husband's British. He's not emotional. I'm super emotional. So that's the sex difference, right? So men everywhere are are less emotionally expressive than women. But like in the UK, the sex difference is smaller because men are, the sex difference is greater overall because men are less emotionally expressive than in other places. But overall, everybody's less emotionally expressive, in the UK. I'm not saying this very clearly. So there are cross-cultural differences in emotionality, but the sex difference persists everywhere. But what's interesting is that the emotionality changes, particularly the crying, changes very, very quickly with testosterone in both directions. So that when males transition and block their testosterone, a whole new world of emotional expression opens up to them. Those emotional changes happen very fast with testosterone changes in the direction that you would predict. So stopping testosterone opens up emotions in a way that seems just female typical before the body changes. And that happens across the board. So that is why I think that culture there plays a role and can shape that sex difference and shape the way that emotions are expressed overall and kind of what's allowed in a particular society, but that it really is the hormone that explains this sex difference that's present pretty much everywhere.
Thank you so much for being on here and doing this. And if at all possible, I think we had so much content to cover here, and probably we could talk for hours. And so I don't know if you would at all be willing to perhaps maybe come back another time.
I would love to come back, and I loved talking to you. I would love to come back. And
Awesome.
It's been great. I could talk to you for hours.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Transparency Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please help out our algorithm by hitting like or subscribe. If you'd like to make a donation, follow the link to our PayPal account. On behalf of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, thanks for your support.